At the beginning of the year, there was a period of time where we were looking at what projects we might want to try to tackle. And it was a bit of a game of trying to figure out whether something small would be better or something longer term would be better, and what the financial implications of that would be. So as you think about developing a game, there's a point at which you reach a standstill of saying, could I reasonably do this with the resources that I have available to me at the moment? And so we were thinking about making a fun open world zany wizard title and feeling like it would probably outstretch what we could do within the time period of what our finances would allow. And as we were talking with David about this, he said, well, that would be something I would have a lot of interest in helping with, because I have a lot of ideas for that particular project. So having a little bit of encouragement that end, and maybe a little bit of financial help from that end, really gave us a feeling that that was the project that we wanted to start toying around with and seeing if we could make into something. That's where we decided to start investigating the world of Wizard Boy over something smaller. Inspiration comes from a lot of different places, things that you've ingested in your own revelry, as it were, playing games, watching movies, things along those lines. And then there's also like something that just kind of comes out of your stomach. You know, kind of like a big vomitous glob in which you realize, hey, that's something that interests me. It's kind of hard to decipher what's coming from where. So is it that you played some sort of a wizard game when you were a kid and you always wanted to be able to use your spells in all sorts of scenarios instead of just on the objects that were labeled to have those spells used on them? Well, yeah, that's probably part of it. Is it that you have an interest in open-ended design? Well, maybe that's part of it. Is it that you see a lack of a certain type of game on the market and you feel like you can fulfill that and make something that's kind of unique and that doesn't trod on other ground? Yeah, that's probably part of it too. But at the end of the day, it kind of just comes back to what you're feeling in the core, in terms of what your developer instincts are telling you is the right way to go, and what you feel like you'd have enough interest in to be spending months or even years of your life working on. So back in March, I started toying around with the idea of making a third-person game, because I've never made a third-person game, nor have I ever used Unreal Engine. I popped a cube in, I started getting it to move around, and realized pretty quickly that there was going to be an extremely sharp learning curve. It's not exactly easy to transition to a new toolset, especially when you're very used to a different type of toolset. And with the extra pressure of knowing that, you know, you have big aspirations, you want this to be a multiplayer project, you want this to have all sorts of strange, very specific interactions, there's a lot that you need to find out and experience and relearn in the front half of development so that it doesn't bite you in the second half. So for several months, that was pretty much what I was doing, taking default assets like cubes and capsules and putting them in a scene and trying to make them move, and sometimes not making them move and trying to figure out why they wouldn't move, and getting to a point where they were vaguely resembling the mechanics that I wanted to have in the game so that I would understand what I was doing wrong and what I would have to do in the future to make it right. The game is just different, you know. It's like some weird mashup of a Hitman level and Goat Simulator put together with some other sort of references mixed in, things like Deus Ex. That was one of the first games that we played, just a reference for this game. Looking at Deus Ex, you would see absolutely no comparison with Wizard Boy. But underneath what the game is, it's actually very similar. So it doesn't really fit easily into some sort of existing genre. And because of that, there's a lot of trepidation in just throwing that out into the global player base and not knowing how people will react to it. Like, if I was going to make a roguelite, I kind of know how people will react to that, because there are a lot of other roguelites for me to look at and say, okay, if I do something sort of similar to this one, this is approximately how people will feel about it. But when you're making something that's kind of just a weird amalgamate lump of different ideas, there's not really any reason for you to emotionally believe that you know why people will enjoy it. You put all sorts of things inside of there hoping that people will latch onto it, that they'll see what interests you about it, that they'll engage with it in the way that you want to, but you don't know. And because of that, it's pretty scary. It's something that I wouldn't say I'm as excited about as I am hoping that it goes smoothly in the way that we have been planning for it to go, and realizing that it might not. Coming into doing a multiplayer game, I knew that networking was going to be difficult, but once I started looking at the documentation for Unreal and networking, I had a feeling like, okay, I can probably take a month and make this happen. It looks like everything works smoothly so long as you know what you're supposed to do at the beginning, and once you do that, everything else should flow pretty simply afterward. Well, in reality, that wasn't the case. The time period in which I started doing the implementation for the netcode happened to be a time period in which Steam was changing some core systems about how they did their networking. So if you didn't know, you can connect players directly through Steam. They have a system set up where one player can say that they are hosting, and then other players via Steam can crawl on over to them and say, we want to join, we want to join. And once all the players crawl on over, Steam will say, oh, okay, you can join the game. I've got my Play-Doh. This might come in handy. So normally, this has been very simple. But if Steam changes the way that those players connect on the back end of their server, suddenly you have this strange little putty wall that nobody can get through. So you've got all your players and they want to play, and then they hit the putty wall and they can't get through the putty wall, and the server is over here saying, I really would seriously like to play, and everybody over here is like, yes, we would also seriously like to play, but nobody can talk to each other because there's Play-Doh in the middle. So the networking was one of many obstacles. There's design obstacles, whether the game that you're envisioning is actually fun or not. There are those logistical obstacles like, gosh darn it, I just can't get two players to connect through this gosh darn putty wall. And then there's just obstacles of logistics. Do we have the time? Do we have the resources to fully develop the game into what we want it to be? So one by one, as things came up, we addressed them as best we could, and then we would find a new obstacle and we would address it, and we would find another one and we would address it, and bit by bit by bit, we ended up with a product that was at least playable. Well, that's a pretty good start. This culminated in us being able to release our demo in the time span that we wanted to release our demo in, and the demo was extremely well received. I wouldn't say I was surprised, but I did feel a little bit surprised and also very encouraged that people seem to like it. For a strange project with a lot of hurdles and a very short timeline, it was very reassuring to see that people truly did connect with it. And I'm very grateful for that. I'd like to thank everybody that checked out the demo, and all the people that gave very positive and warm comments about it. Getting this reassurance from players to say, yes, we like the concept. The fear turns from, is the concept good? Can I make a game that people are going to like? Into, how do I not mess up the game that I've made so that people end up not liking? Interesting how the human brain works in that way. But I will say that things have continued fairly well, and development has been progressing. And so have the problems.